I'm coming to you with a somewhat different introduction today. I'm evidently sitting in a rocking chair. This isn't, although I know many of my friends think that I qualify because of the stage I'm in life. After all, I do turn 68 this month, but it's just a number. And regardless of what others may think I need to be doing this stage of my life, this really doesn't suit me, except for this purpose. And we'll explain a little bit more as we progress in our message today. But this rocking chair, it's called a sewing rocking chair. This was one of two pieces that I received from my grandmother, my mom's mom. It was one of the few things she left behind, and evidently my brothers didn't want it, but I thought it was a cool thing. And there's a role that this plays in our story today that we will come back to, but I wanted to start with this because I do have your attention after all. So I'm going to stop rocking so I can actually talk. That I've been gone now for a little over a week. Many of you saw the non-post last week about the video, why there was not a video, and the story is still ongoing. Our sister-in-law, Sarah's sister, is still in those final stages of, depends on how you look at it, either life or death, because we know that what awaits her next is true life. And we don't know how long this is going to take. She's awake, she's alert, she's up and down. It's that roller coaster ride in the last stages of cancer for her. And we spent a week there, and in East Texas, where they are, you don't have much cell service, so there's no way to post any video last week. But it has forced me to think about some things. This material I prepared the week before and was going to share it, but it's given me some time to think even further about these issues in respect to life and death, and this sense of call I have to minister in this season of my life, which is to come alongside of churches that are really in that end stage as well, whether they're willing to admit to it or not. And one of the things that I think most of us recognize, but I don't know if we spend a whole lot of time talking about it, and that is the fact that churches don't just one day turn the corner and die. No more than a person, typically, even if they succumb to a massive heart attack or to a stroke and they check out, that event was not really the beginning of their health issues. It was the culmination of those. To sort of demonstrate this principle of the build-up to the unfortunate end that is not necessarily necessary in the life of church, although for us biologically, sooner or later we check out, but it doesn't have to be before our time. Many of you have, like I have been watching these news clips of this part of the world, this image of Ukraine. I came across this article in preparation for our time today. And the article associated with it was mapped. This is what a Russian invasion of Ukraine could look like. Now, it would be real easy to read this headline and say, okay, we're not even a month yet into this invasion of Ukraine, that this could have been written 3 months ago or 6 months ago or a year ago. But when you look at the dateline on this article, it is from 2014. 8 years removed, which means that someone was aware that things were not as they should be, and certainly not as they could be, so that we end up where we are now, in a place that, opinions vary all over the map as to what we should be doing in response to the crisis of the death of civilians, women, children, without respect to their role in politics or military action. Having said all that, I confess to you that one of the things that one of the traps we sort of fall into is that when we step into something new, whether it's motorcycle riding, or if it's boating, or if it happens to be you get your pilot's license, that whatever that new thing is that consumes our life is something that really takes over all of our life. Everything becomes about motorcycles. Everything becomes about boats. Everything becomes about airplanes. Everything becomes, whatever the issue or the interest or the passion du jour happens to be. And I confess to you that I'm sort of in that same boat, because this sense of calling that I have in this season of my life to come alongside of these kinds of churches, knowing that they don't have to die if they're willing to do something, is realizing that when I get the opportunity, it's not because something has just happened, but as a matter of fact, there is a build-up to that season when eventually, if nothing changes, death is inevitable. And I thought about this in respect to the time that we spent in East Texas with my sister-in-law, realizing that Nancy, who's very, very, very ready for what is next, she has a living relationship with the Lord. She and her family, here's an image that I took. They have turned the living room into the bedroom to make it easier for everybody involved. Of she and her husband and her children sitting around during this process, that for her, cancer didn't happen yesterday. As a matter of fact, cancer didn't happen last year. Truth be known, we're not exactly sure when it first occurred. We were with them almost 2 years ago in Laurel, Mississippi on a trip, and even then she was already having this unrelenting cough that the doctors just simply wrote off as a typical cough or allergy related or sinus related, and was just giving her cough medication. It wasn't until roughly 18 months ago, when she got tired of the unrelenting cough, that she finally went to another doctor, and that's when they had diagnosed that not only did she have non-small cell lung cancer, but by then it was already stage 4, and it had already metastasized. Started in her lung, went to a rib, went to her adrenal gland, and that's when this whole journey of trying to seek treatment took place. And it's not been a pleasant ride. It became so unpleasant that she and her husband decided a week ago that let's just, this is a losing battle. Let's go ahead and just stop the treatment and just live out our lives and make the most we have in the time that we have left. And understanding that cancer it's a mutation. It starts out as a normal cell, that something goes wrong in that cell, and it begins to mutate and take over the body. And they're bloodthirsty. If you know anything about tumors, they thrive on that. And for that reason, she's had to have several units of blood over time transfused into her just to restore her to some semblance of normalcy. And yet, it did nothing. It stalled it for a while, but then it finally gave up. So while I'm thinking about this, because this is what I'm consumed with these days, churches, and this is the majority of evangelical churches, are in this state, whether they admit it or not. Let's come back to the rocking chair. This is I can remember this chair from my childhood, and when I would go over and visit my grandparents as they were aging toward the end of their life, and I would sit in this rocking chair. Most people know that rocking chairs are just, they're for dispersing energy that you have. There's something sort of encouraging, there's something soothing about being able to sit and to, which is the reason that old people like doing it. It doesn't require a whole lot of energy. And that's what most rocking chairs are for. They are to go nowhere vessels that you spend energy on and actually end up exactly where you started. Except this rocking chair. This rocking chair is different. Because I discovered, and my grandmother told me, that already it has happened. This rocking chair, with every rocking motion, is moving in reverse. Go figure. It just bumped into the hearth on my fireplace here. Just to remind me of that truth. So in thinking about it, as we get ready to read this passage, and we're not going to take a whole lot of time here, realizing that churches that are just in normal rocking chair mode means that they're not advancing. They're just sort of plateaued. They're holding their own. They're able to sort of be satisfied, be placated. that people are generally happy and content, even if they're not reaching anybody new. And there are a number of excuses that churches weave and church people weave to be okay with that, but knowing that the kingdom of God is about advancing. It's about advancing the message of the cross, the gospel of Jesus. It's about touching lives and being a part of encouraging people that don't know Him, that they might come alongside and become a part of the family. It's about discipling each other. It's about stuff that is in front of us that we ought to always be moving toward until our time is done. But the average church is not moving forward in anything. They're just sort of biding their time. And at some point in that life cycle, when a church goes from being outwardly focused and they make that turn to where they plateau, a plateauing isn't like this. Plateauing is like this. And when they make that crest and they accept the status quo as being acceptable, then they start that descent. And when that descent starts, they're not just in a rocking chair that goes nowhere. They are in a rocking chair that actually goes backwards. Having said all that, and having consumed a few moments of our precious time already, let me go ahead and read this passage, and we'll work our way through this material as I continue to think about this issue and this stage of life for churches, perhaps in a way that I've not before. What is the lead up? What is the ramp up to being in that place for churches? Let's go back and read once again this from Revelation chapter 1, beginning in verse 9. I, John, your brother and fellow partner in the tribulation and kingdom and perseverance which are in Jesus, was on the island called Patmos because of the word of God and the testimony of Jesus. I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day, and I heard behind me a loud voice like the sound of a trumpet saying, write in a book what you see and send it to the 7 churches, to Ephesus and to Smyrna and to Pergamum and to Thyatira and to Sardis and to Philadelphia and to Laodicea. So when I'm thinking about this passage, this is John, who has been sentenced really to death on this rocky crag there in the Aegean Sea, just off the coast of Turkey. And it strikes me as interesting that he, toward the end of his life, he's almost 100 years old by this time. History tells us there were numerous attempts on his life, and miraculously he survived. So he's in this circumstance, and he is having a moment of worship and an encounter with the Lord. And the Lord is saying to him, I have something I want you to share with these churches that's not having this kind of experience. And I think, isn't that interesting? So what sort of sets the stage for end-stage life in a church? A lot of it has to do with, it's created by our expectations. Verses 12 through 16. John writes, then I turned to see the voice that was speaking with me, and having turned, I saw 7 golden lampstands. And in the middle of the lampstands, I saw one like a son of man, clothed in a robe reaching to the feet, and girded across his chest with a golden sash. His head and his hair were white like white wool, like snow, and his eyes were like a flame of fire. His feet were like burnished bronze when it has been made to glow in a furnace. And his voice was like the sound of many waters. In his right hand he held 7 stars, and out of his mouth came a sharp 2-edged sword, and his face was like the sun shining in its strength. I know that for most of us, whether life is good or life is bad, whether we are disappointed or whether we're excited and happy, primarily is driven by what our expectations are going into that event or that moment or that season of life. It's true of marriage. Whether you're happy in your marriage or not has been determined by what you expect it to be before you started, or with having children. This is a real one that catches us. Some of you may be friends with Joel Pazmino. He was the son of the Hispanic pastor we had in Maryland for a number of years. And recently he posted this. He said, however bad you may think that your day is going, it's not your child just took off his diaper while in the crib. threw the diaper off the crib, and then proceeded to take a dump all over his bed sheets. Bad. And it's only 10 a.m. Happy Valentine's Day. Those of us who have had children and have raised them from infancy into some form of responsible adults know that your expectations going in determines how much pleasure and satisfaction you're going to get out of it. If you're expecting little angels, innocent little angels, to occupy your life from crib until they leave, you are set up for a huge disappointment, even when they're not trying to be bad. And they will store that up and they will achieve it in spades. So our expectations, so I'm thinking about John and I'm thinking about these churches that he's writing to, and we have this imagery that of supposed to be of Jesus, and it's an image that is not a familiar image to John. After all, he spent 3 years with Jesus. He knew what he looked like. He knew what he sounded like. And yet he hears this voice behind him and he turns around and he has this encounter that looks like one artist has rendered it like this. White robes, white hair, sword coming out of the mouth, and he has these stars in his hands, and there's these candlesticks that represent the 7 churches. And if you're looking at the map, if John is on the coast of the Aegean Sea over here, and Turkey is right next to that, the closest one of these is Ephesus, because the Isle of Patmos is just off the coast from where Ephesus is just inland. And you go in a clockwise motion, you go through all of these churches. I don't know if that was by design. I'm not sure that it really matters. But I just know that John was familiar with Ephesus because his burial place is there. Here's an image of his grave marker. Because history tells us when he received that commission from our Lord on the cross to take care of Mary, the mother of Jesus, this is where they ended up in Turkey. This is where John eventually died. This is where Mary eventually died, although some think she didn't die, she went on to heaven. No support for that. And so our expectations create what the journey is supposed to be because of where we've been, because of where we are, and because what we want to be true. So our expectations create this. For John, his response determined what the experience was going to be like, which is true for ours. Our response to the unexpected really is going to determine what the experience is going to be like. You know, the questions are, is our first instinct to worship, or have we set boundaries on the Spirit? Look what John said. He said, when I saw him, I fell at his feet like a dead man. One of the several words in the Bible that is translated worship just literally means to lie prostrate. And I think, you know, worship at its heart is not singing, it's not lifting hands, it's not shouting. Worship is an attitude of the heart where we recognize whose presence we're standing in, and we are awestruck by that. You see, while John knew what Jesus sounded like in the flesh, when he heard this sound, it didn't sound like that. And when he turned around and saw him, he didn't look like that. But John was not driven by his expectations. His response was, I'm in the presence of Jesus as he really is. And so I think for those churches that are at risk, if they're not already teetering on the edge of the grave for them and their history, you know, where does that all begin? There was an expectation at one time that they lived out, but then over the course of the time, they became satisfied or they became dissatisfied. But they've ended up at this place where the prospects of a bright future, where the funerals outnumber the births, where no one new is coming in and becoming a part of the life of that body. You see, one of the things that I noted in my understanding of this journey of cancer, and I've been studying this stuff for a lifetime of ministry, but it's really come home because of the condition of my sister-in-law, is that disease, whether it's in a human body or whether it's in the body of Christ known as the church, doesn't take over everything at once. It starts with one cell that goes rogue. Just one. Now, we know from medical science, they tell us that the earlier cancer is diagnosed, the better the chances are of treatment and recovery and healthy life beyond that. So if the cancer is caught in its very earliest stages, then it can simply be removed. And so I get to thinking about in the life of a church that one of the things that those of us that do this kind of thing and been in the trenches a long time, note that most churches are not led by the pastor. If you're a student of John Maxwell and his teachings about leadership and his early experience with Claude in that church, and he's the one that at least introduced us, whether it originated with him or not, that leadership is influence. And so the true leader in any organization or any entity is the primary influencer. And so when a church turns the corner in the wrong direction and head down the road that is a dead-end road, it starts with one. And in the typical church that's in that throes right now, as I've preached in a number of churches, and if you happen to be watching this and a part of one of those churches, it's something I knew going in. And it's something that was confirmed while I was there, and is confirmed in the fact that I haven't been invited back to those churches, is that those churches have one or two, in rare cases it might be three, but then, that's a little bit too much shared authority. Usually one person might be willing to share it with the second one, but it's highly unlikely they're going to share it with a third one. So there is a primary influencer, and then there's a secondary influencer. And it doesn't matter how many other people who are part of the life of that body of believers, they are not the decision makers. And they're not deciding on what is supposed to be and what will not be. And so the question, if the Lord is wanting to do something, here he appears to John, who's in captivity on the Isle of Patmos, and John has a worship experience. But when he writes these letters to the churches, it's not about them having a worship experience. It's about things that are wrong among the few things that might be right. And so our question is that when Jesus is wanting to do something fresh and new and appear in a way that is not familiar to us, is it our first instinct to worship, or have we set boundaries on the Spirit? Second is, are we desiring a fresh touch from the Lord? Let's resume our reading in verse 17. And he placed his right hand on me, saying, do not be afraid. I am the first and the last, and the living one. And I was dead, and behold, I am alive forevermore, and I have the keys of death and of Hades. Are we desiring a fresh touch from the Lord? And in this case, John receives that touch. This person that he sees, that he falls down in an act of worship before, even though this was not a familiar face or familiar sound, his response was a right response in worship. That person reached out and placed his hand on him and said, don't be afraid. I have got this. When a church, a body of believers, whether it's 30 people or 100 people or 500 people, and they've rounded that curve and they're in that descent, however steep it happens to be, is it that they want a fresh experience with the Spirit of God? Do they really want God to do something that's not on the agenda or not on the itinerary? Are they desiring a fresh touch from the Lord? I got to tell you, I don't, even despite the fact that they say yes, they are, there's no evidence that that is true. Here's an experiment. Try to shuffle the deck on the order of service in one of those kind of places. Let's say we're not going to have a call to worship today. Let's say we're going to start with preaching. Let's say that we're going to sing a couple of songs, and then we're going to have the offering at the end. Chances are, it is not going to be well received. Matter of fact, somebody will remind you, if it ain't broke, don't break it. Boy, they have got a sad sort of idea of what broken or not broken looks like or sounds like. So our response to what God wants to do among us or with us or in us or through us is going to be determined by whether we really want a fresh touch from the Lord. And then finally, are we willing to embrace a new challenge from the Spirit? Resume our reading. Therefore write these things which you have seen, and the things which are, and the things which will take place after these things. As for the mystery of the 7 stars which you saw in my right hand, and the 7 golden lampstands, the 7 stars of the angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 lampstands are the 7 churches. So this is where I am in this whole process. There's no going back for Nancy. I mean, it doesn't mean that God can't miraculously intervene while she signed up for hospice. It's possible to unhospice yourself if there's a miraculous turnaround. But all the indications are that that's not in the cards for her. She's accepting of what God is saying to her in this season of her life. That what began as one mutated cell has now run its course, and death is certain. As I'm thinking about what I'm witnessing with her, we're waiting for that next phone call to make another trip, this one for a celebration of life with her and the family and the many friends that will be there. We don't know when that's coming. So my schedule over the next 10 days or 2 weeks is uncertain, and so how often we get to do this over the course, be in prayer for her and the family, that God uses this for His honor and glory. But I'm thinking about this because this is where I am. This is what's captivating my thinking, my idea. How does this translate into trying to minister to these churches that are dead and dying? Until these churches recognize that they have 1 or 2 influencers that are making the decisions. It doesn't matter what the expectations and the hope of the body of believers is. If those 1 or 2 controlling agents in the church, those influencers, aren't willing to be open to God doing something fresh and new among them, there is no hope. It's amazing how long this character has remained before us and will. It seems like there's one television network that is 24 hours a day, the Andy Griffith Show. And people of all ages and all nationalities are captured by this show. And while he was on there, I don't doubt that Barney was everyone's favorite character. I chose this image because it was the best one I can find of him and what? His salt and pepper suit. It was the only suit he owned, and it was a special occasion when he dressed up in that suit. So indulge me. I'm thinking about these churches that they know the way they want things. Many of them are without a pastor. And they have a search committee that's going through this process of trying to find a pastor. But I seriously doubt if they're looking for God's man. One of the last churches that I preached in before the service began, the primary influencer came to me with a bulletin, order of service, and said, okay, this is what I want you to do here and here and here and here. Do the invocation, get up and preach, stand down front at the end of the service, blah, 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 blah. And I'm thinking to myself, I've only been doing this for almost 50 years. I think I understand this. And yet here's somebody telling me what I'm supposed to do. And I realize that those churches that have a mutation that has taken place in them, they're not what they were when they started. Their goals are not the same as when they started. When they started, they were all about reaching the unchurched, sharing the gospel with those that have yet to believe. And now they've dug a moat. They've put a drawbridge out there, lest the Spirit of God come through the front door and say, guess what? I want you to have a fresh encounter and a new experience. I want to do something fresh and new among you. But it means changing the order of service at the very least. So indulge me, indulge me. You know, it's like these churches are saying, okay, our pastor, whoever pastors our church, has to fit into Barney's salt and pepper suit. He can't be taller. He can't be wider. He can't be heavier. He can't be anything, because this is what we want of we want a pastor who fits into the salt and pepper suit. We don't want somebody who's going to come in and wear a suit that we don't like. If this seems a little crude, I'm sorry, but you know, when it's about dying or not dying, there's a time when politeness needs to be set aside. And the purpose isn't to offend people, to hurt people, but to speak the truth in love. I know that my sister-in-law Nancy, if you were to ask her, if they diagnosed that cancer in its very first month, would you have wanted them to go in and surgically remove it? You know the answer to that. Yes. And if you were to ask her, before it metastasized, while it was still in that one lung, if they detected it early enough, would you have wanted them to go in and remove that one lung? And I think we know the answer to that. The answer is yes. But for her, it didn't get detected in time until finally it's spreading in her body, and there's no turning back. See, we haven't even got to the 7 churches yet that Paul is writing this thing to, because I realize that the problems exist before the problem is manifest. Death begins occurring early on, and it's brought in by one who has a spiritual mutation that is not willing to surrender and bow before Jesus as he appears in a fresh and a new form to us. That we're not willing to lie prostrate on the ground in front of him, to have him reach down and touch us and say, don't worry, I've got this. I'm the beginning, I'm the end. I have the keys of heaven and hell. This is what I want you to do. I want you to sound a warning to these 7 churches. If you're in one of those churches, my encouragement to you is start looking for that Spirit of Jesus to appear and to have a word to you, but knowing chances are that to turn the corner and to find a future of life and health and growth will not be a painless expression and experience until you've dealt with the real problem. Let me lead us in prayer. So, Father, I commit this to you, both my personal journey in life and the ministry you've called me to in these churches that so need a fresh word from you. Help me know how to deal with them. Grant somebody in this context the courage to stand up and say, just stop, enough is enough. We need a fresh encounter with God, and we need to be willing for him to do something that we don't approve of in a business meeting. So thank you for your love that sustains us and can turn death into life in any person and any context if we're just willing to surrender to you. It's in Jesus' name we pray, and for his sake. Amen. Well, thank you for tuning in. For those of you who support our ministry, I'm grateful for that. And if you would like to be a part of that, then you can always find a way to gift us through Facebook or through your bank, or send us a check at this mailing address. Or if you have questions or words of encouragement or insights or recommendations or suggestions, then email me at this email address, and I'll be glad to look at that or to pray with you about it. And we'll see what unfolds next week and the week after that as to when we come back to these 7 churches. But I'm looking forward to this journey and what God is going to say through it to all of us. So thank you. God bless you. Now, don't get in a rocking chair before you have to.